please be seated. The court is now in session. Next, I hand over the floor to the defense counsel for the accused. First, start from counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia. So you have the floor now to put questions for this witness.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honours. Before we would like to start questioning the witness, I would like to make the remark that we have just again been served with a big binder with 2 statements from case 4, statements from witnesses in case 4. One statement seems to be a very important statement for our case. It contains, as we briefly saw, 128 pages. Yesterday we were able to glance through the statements quickly to see if there was any relevance in relation to this witness. Obviously, when we were served now, is only 5 minutes or 10 minutes ago, we are not able to have a proper look at these statements. So I think right now we have reached the moment that the only proper way to proceed is to postpone our questioning, or postpone the hearings until a moment that we have been able to at least have a first glance at the new statements. So yesterday we said we could continue with this witness, but I think we have now, like I said, reached a moment that we might not be able to continue with this witness. So now I think officially we ask again for postponement of the hearings.
President, you may now proceed. International Deputy Co-Prosecutor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. Yes, indeed, we have provided to the parties here present today the 2 written records that are part of the 89 written records that we spoke about yesterday. These 2 written records concern this particular segment, Trangkak and Trangkachang, and it is our concern to forward these written records expeditiously so that the parties can read them as soon as possible. So this is why we did so. It's not to corner people, no. It's not to catch people by surprise. Indeed, there is a written record that is quite long. However, among the 8 written records that were forwarded yesterday, and among the 2 that were forwarded today, that's to say 10, which concern this particular segment, we can say that among these 10 written records, there are only some that describe one single witness, a witness to come, to TCW 809, if I'm not mistaken. Among these 10 written records, there is no other mention of a witness who would come soon. And I don't believe that the fact that we have notified at 12 in order to expedite things, that the fact that there are 2 new written records, that this will impede the examination of Mr. Yao this afternoon. And it is also not proven that this will have an impact on the person's testimony tomorrow. These are not people who are necessarily directly involved or concerned by the other written records that were notified to the parties. So, if I were to provide details regarding the content of these 10 written records, our colleague will be in a position to provide you with this detail in the coming minutes if the Chamber wishes so. Thank you, Mr. President. Once again, I think that we are dealing here with a problem of methodology and a problem of what we may understand as useful when confronting testimonies. We're not saying, first of all, to make things clear, that the OCP is laying traps. Of course, we understand the problems of disclosure with regard to documents coming from the OCIJ, but however, the prosecutor stands up today and tells you that the content of the statements does not have an impact on the testimony of such and such a witness, but we cannot say anything because we haven't read these statements, so there's a bias here. The second point, and this is what I was saying yesterday, that it is not because we're not presented with a witness who is mentioned in the statements that the statements are not relevant. It's not because the names do not appear that the facts or the elements described with regard to Krang Tachang are useless. So maybe the prosecution should have maybe a broader vision of what the defense understands by confronting testimonies. So these are the two clarifications I wish to provide, and to tell you that indeed for the moment we're kind of in the dark because we do not have the elements that the prosecutors have, and we're simply asking the chamber to have the chance to stand on an equal footing.
President, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. And in order to share our position with you, we reminded to you yesterday how important it is for the civil parties that this trial move ahead. But we're dealing here with a situation which is rather problematic and unusual, including for us. And we have just received a very thick, loose folder with the documents that we were not able to read yet. So this indeed is a problem for us. So we'd like to rely on the Chamber's wisdom with regard to this issue. And once again, we understand the concerns of the defense counsels because we are exactly in the same situation. Thank you. I will be brief, Mr. President, but I simply want to react to this comment of not being on an equal footing. Yes, in reality, yes, because we cannot use these written records as long as they haven't been forwarded to all of the parties, as long as we don't have the clearance from the OCIJ, so we cannot use them here in the courtroom. I just wanted this to be clear.
Monsieur le Président, excusez-moi.
Mr. President, one clarification that I forgot to make is that also from a purely technical standpoint, in the latest folders that were given to us, we do not have the link with the references that we could use in a public hearing. So even if we want to use the statements that we haven't yet read, we wouldn't be able to do so in any case in these circumstances that were set by the prosecutors. And of course, to answer the co-prosecutor, I understand perfectly well that they cannot use the statements as long as they haven't received clearance from the OCIJ. But, however, they have read these statements.
President, Judge Fen, you now have the floor to respond and address to the matter raised by parties. You have the floor now, Judge Fen.
Well, everybody hopefully agrees that this is not about assigning blame, but about managing a difficult situation in a way that ensures a fair and expeditious trial. The Chamber has given this whole situation some thought from yesterday onwards, or even before. And an email will go out to the parties today, which outlines how the Chamber envisages the near future. I don't want to go into the details here because it would be too confusing, but we will give time to the parties to familiarize themselves with the documents. However, we think that as far as today's and tomorrow's witness are concerned, the best way to go ahead is go ahead on the basis of currently available documents. Should there be a need to recall these witnesses after all of us have had time to familiarize ourselves with the contents of the newly released documents, the requests will be made and the Chamber will make a decision on that.
President, thank you, Judge Fens. Now, the Chamber gives the floor to counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia to put question for this witness. Counsel. Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. Mr. Witness, you answered some questions already, particularly question put by the co-prosecutor and the lead co-lawyer. I need some clarification from you in light of your answers. I would like to know about the work that you did in your cooperative. You stated that while you were working, the units were divided. 3 units were divided. What about the working condition? Were they the same in all the units, or were they different in each unit? Answer. Mr. President, the workload in all the 3 units were different. Unit 1 was much progressive, and the third unit was not really progressive. That is why units were divided into 3. Question. While you were working in your unit, were you allowed to take leave if you were sick? Answer. If we were sick, we were allowed to be hospitalized. Question. When you were admitted into a hospital or clinic, could you have relatives taking care of you at the hospital or clinic? Answer. No, we had no relatives with us. We were on our own. We were alone. There were medics. Even our relative wanted to visit us. They would not be allowed to go and visit us because they were told that they were not medics. Question. During the time that you were working, did you have time to relax? Answer. While we are on duty, we could not rest. We started our work, for example, from 2 p.m. until 5 p.m. and after that we took a bath and went to sleep. Question. During the time that you were working, was there any regulation stating that you could relax or have leave once or twice a month? Answer. We do not have time to relax or to have time to take leave, and we have no weekends. We had no weekends to relax, but we could come to visit our family once in every 10 days. Question. So you could go to visit your family in every 10 days. Is that correct? Answer. Yes, I could go to visit my family who were in also mobile units. So as for husband and wife, they could visit each other, and the day after they would have to return back to work. Counsel, thank you. I now move to another topic in relation to your work in children units. While you were in children units, while you were working in the children units, you taught alphabets to the children. Did you teach any other subjects to children? Answer. No, children were not taught of any other contents or other subject matter. They were taught about alphabets and arithmetics. Question. Based on your answer, you said that there was a guidebook for you to teach the children. So what was the guidebook about? Answer. As for the guidebook, there were pictures and there were alphabets and vowels in the books, and the guidebook was for teaching children. Counsel, thank you very much. After you taught the children, were the children under your own supervision at night time, or were they allowed to go back to their parents? Answer. Those children were under my supervision, and after 10 days they could have time to visit their parents. Question. In relation to food regime, so what was the food ration for those children? Answer. Children had the same meal as those who were in the mobile units. So they got a pot of rice, cooked rice, for a group of 8 or 10 children. And as for children, they would pack the rice in their krama and took it to somewhere they could have fish with the rice. Counsel, you said that the children could have rice with the grilled fish. So were children allowed to find and search for fish to eat? Answer. During the time that the children went to tend cows and cattle, they would find chance to look for fish, so they could have fish. Question. were there any other unit chief above you, since you were already supervising those children? Answer. I was below others. There were other chief above me, and if the children made any trouble, I would be blamed. I mean, my chief would blame me. Counsel, thank you very much. This is my last question. In your community, were there any Cham ethnicity? Answer. No, there were no Cham. Only Khmer was in my community, and there were no Chinese as well. Counsel, thank you, Mr. President. That conclude the line of my questioning. President, thank you very much, Counsel. You may now proceed, Mr. Victor Kope.
Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. I have a few more questions, not many. My first question to you is about an answer that you gave in your statement to the investigators of the investigating judges. That's answer 24 of E3/5515. You were asked a question about sick people, and you answered to the investigator something about your wife being sent to the hospital for having a postnatal depression. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more how long your wife was sick and when was she sent to the hospital?
Yes, she had a postnatal depression, and that's prior to 1975. And at the time we were in the village cooperative, she only delivered her baby for 7 days, and then she was ordered to carry earth. And she said that she could not do it, but it said it should be okay for her. And then she went, and then she became sick. And then we asked for a traditional medicine mixed in wine, but they refused to give it to her. And this happened when we were at Ong Ponarie.
And which year was that? Was it before 75 or after 1975?
It happened before 1975. It happened about 2 or 3 months prior to 1975. That's when we were ordered to carry earth along the ponds to use it.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Another topic. You spoke earlier about 3 types of cooperative members, full rights type candidate members and the positive members. Do you know if between 1975 and 1979 there was a moment that all categories were abolished? There was only one sort of community or cooperation member, that there were no more distinctions between the 3 groups? Do you remember this?
As for the candidate was about to be upgraded to the full rights group, but then the Vietnamese troops arrived.
But is it correct that in July 1978 all 3 categories merged into one category?
Yes, I remember some, but it only happened for the Unit 1 and Unit 2, and it was not applicable for Unit 3.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I move on to another topic. You said earlier this morning that when collective meals were introduced, that if people did not agree with this, they might be taken away and killed, and that for that reason nobody dared to make any protest against these collective meals. Could you give us any example of anybody who actually protested and was sent to Krang Tachan or to anywhere else?
At my work, where I live to the north, it didn't happen, but to the south part, it happened to one man that was Tavan. He was taken away at the time.
I wanted to ask you some questions more about Tavin. I'll do that now, since you mentioned his name. You said that you heard from a member of your CART unit what the reason was of his arrest and that he was in fact sent to Krang Tachan. Would you be able to tell us why or how the member of the CART unit knew this about Tavin? What was his knowledge for the reasons of his arrest and the fact that he was sent to Krang Tachan?
I knew Tavan because I used to write an outskirt with him. One day he left the kitchen hall after he had his field, and he said that the food was insufficient, and probably somebody overheard that statement that he made, and then he was taken away.
But would it be fair to say that you are speculating as to the reason of his arrest, that could be a reason, but that you don't know for sure?
He was arrested while I was there because we slept together. As I said, we wrote a card together.
But did the people who come to arrest him tell him the reason why he was arrested? I'm still not sure how you know what the reason for his arrest was.
No, they didn't state the reason for his arrest. They said that he would be taken for re-education. And in fact, in my unit, that is amongst the 40 members of the unit, he was the one that was taken away for re-education.
I'll try one more time, and the last time, Mr. Witness, what makes you say that you know the reason for his arrest? What's the basis of your knowledge for the reason, regarding the reasons of his arrest?
I knew because people whispered to one another for his arrest. After his arrest, then I asked other people, and they all said that he was taken for re-education.
Mr. Witness, this morning you also said that people lived in fear during the regime, that people were afraid to make a mistake, because if they made a mistake, they would be taken away and killed. Could you give us one example of somebody who made a mistake and was taken away and then killed?
I don't know what example I can give you. We were part of the base people group, so it did not really happen among our group, but for other groups it did happen.
But are you speaking about things that you've heard, that people were gossiping about, or do you have actual knowledge about this?
What I said was what I heard from other peoples. We talked, for example, when we were having meal about the disappearance of someone.
But Mr. Witness, would it be fair to say that if you were speaking about somebody who disappeared, that when you were talking about it, you were in fact speculating as to the reason for this person's arrest?
No, I did not speculate. I said what I knew at the time.
But Mr. Witness, it's important for us to establish, if you say things, what the sources of your knowledge is, how you know things. If people talk about things, it doesn't mean that they know. So I'm trying to find out from your answers what the source of your knowledge is. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, I understand your question. I knew about the disappearance of someone. For example, in my CAT unit, one member disappeared. Then I asked other members, and then I learned that he was taken away last evening, and that's how I knew about his disappearance.
But the answer you're giving is only about the fact that somebody disappeared, but not for the reasons why this person disappeared. Do you understand the difference? The fact that somebody was taken away is different as to the reasons for somebody's arrest.
I didn't know much about that. What I knew was that he was working in my unit, and then he disappeared. And after an inquiry, I learned that he was taken away and disappeared.
Mr. Witness, this morning you also said that you said something about children from Unit 3 stealing coconuts, and that they were told if they tried to do it again, they would be taken away for execution. Do you know of any real example of a child stealing a coconut or another fruit that was actually taken away to Krang Tachan?
As for children, no children were arrested. However, if they stole rice or coconut fruit, then they will be warned not to do that again. But they were not punished. They were very young children, age were about 12.
But this morning you said that they were told if they would steal again that they would be taken for execution. Is that something that you're not saying now anymore, or am I misunderstanding your answer?
This morning I stated that they would be taken to be killed, but it was just a threat. And in fact, because after they threatened the children like that, the children stopped stealing anymore.
And I have the same question, but this time in respect of couples who were just married. Do you know of any example of couples who were actually sent for re-education or actually sent to Krang Tachan for not consummating their marriage? Do you have any concrete example, or is it just a fear of something?
As for the newlywed couples, no, they were not sent anywhere, but people would come to eavesdrop their living together, and they would be advised to consummate their marriage.
Mr. Witness, would it be fair to say that you are more describing maybe a general fear of possible measures, but that in reality nobody was actually sent to re-education centers or Krang Tachan for violations like stealing coconuts or not consummating marriages? Would that be a fair summary of me?
Yes, that is correct.
A last set of questions, Mr. Witness. You said earlier this morning that you saw that Buddhist statues were thrown into the water. Could you give us some more details? When exactly did this happen, and where? I think you said where, but when and by whom? Who were the perpetrators of this?
The Buddhist statues at the Sakchurum Pagoda were thrown into the water by the villagers, and those villagers were instructed to do so by the unit chief. And in fact, the Buddha statue was dropped into a pond just in front of the Buddhist temple.
So it was done by the villagers at the instruction of the village chief. When exactly did this happen? Do you remember?
It happened in 1975 after Phnom Penh fell. And that was the time that the monks were defrocked and the Buddha statues were dropped into the pond and the cooperative were established.
Do you know if this village chief who instructed the villagers was punished for his deeds, punished by the Khmer Rouge for his deeds?
No, he was not punished because they were one and the same. He was also instructed from the upper level, probably from the commune chief. And then the villagers helped carry the Buddha statue and drop it into the pond.
Do you know this, or are you speculating that he was instructed from the upper echelon?
I knew it for certainty because my cousin actually went there, but he didn't dare to break the Buddha statue. So then he went down, and then other people went up to disassemble the Buddha statue and carry it and place it in a pond. And actually the statue is still there currently.
Do you know of any other examples of destruction of Buddhist statues? Or was this the only time that you saw this or heard about it?
That's all I knew about the destruction of the Buddha statue. They disassembled the statue apart and then threw it into the pond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Witness, for your answers. Thank you, Mr. President.
President, thank you. And the defense counsels for Kiew Sampon, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. My name is Nanta Guissé. I am international co-lawyer for Mr. Kiew Sampon. I have a few very brief questions to put to you in order to gather some clarifications on your testimony. In my notes, I have written that this morning you wrote that Unit 1 was the main labor force, and that within Unit 2 there were people who were not as strong. Is that a correct interpretation of your testimony, that in Unit 1 there were strong members or stronger members than those who constituted Unit 2? Is that exact?
In Unit 1, members were recruited based on their strengths and the age. As for the elder people, they were placed in another unit. And yes, Unit 2's force was not as strong as Unit 1. And they also were divided into subgroups, for example, in the mobile unit for women and for those women with children. And also there would be the plowing unit, which was a part of the strong unit.
Dans votre déclaration,
In your statement before the co-investigating judges, under E3/5515, under question number 9, you talked about the division of labor, and you said, and I quote, work was divided amongst those who could, for example, construct large structures, as well as those who could gather all sorts of things. We were told, those who were not as aged would be told to farm tobacco, for instance, vegetables, and elderly women would have to look over children, on average 5 to 10 children per woman. The women would have to gather cow dung, and then they would also be ordered to teach reading and writing for 2 or 3 hours a day, and after the classes they would be told to tend the cows before their meals. Is what you told me earlier, that is, within Unit 1, there were several groups, and were the groups divided according to age, and they were members of Unit 1?
As for the women unit, they were placed into one group for transplanting rice. And for men, they were also placed into a unit responsible for carrying earth. And children were placed into another unit. And other women were placed in a unit to look after the children. And other men were placed into a unit for growing vegetables.
Ce matin également,
In addition, this morning, you referred to the fishing unit. Was the fishing unit a part of Unit 1?
it existed in all the unit 1 and 2 and 3. So there was a unit responsible for fishing and for gathering vegetables for the kitchen. And some members of the unit were also responsible for planting vegetables.
Donc, si je comprends,
So, if I understand correctly, each unit had its own plowing unit and its own fishing unit, which would be responsible for supplying provisions to each unit. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I meant. For Unit 3, for example, they have their own unit responsible for the food supply to their respective unit, and then there's a fishing unit, and all these subunits existed across the 3 units. And no unit or no subunit in Unit 1 can provide food supply to Unit 2 or Unit 3. They had to supply their own unit.
d'accord.
All right. Speaking of the fishing unit, you described that you were served soup during the meals. Was the soup made of fish that was captured by the fishing unit? And if so, how often?
As for a fish soup, we had it almost every day. And usually, for example, every 10th day we will be given beef in addition to our regular vegetable. As for fish, we had a unit to go fishing, and we would have fish every day, despite the varied amount of fish that we had.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I have no further questions, Mr. President. I would like to hand the floor over to my colleague.
President, yes, and Councillor Kong Som-on, you have the floor. Kong Som-on, thank you, Mr. President. And good afternoon, Mr. Pneu Yao. My name is Kong Som-on, and I have some questions to put to you. In relation to your role during the Democratic Cambodia regime, you stated that you joined the revolution in 1970, and later on you became a teacher for children. And I'd like to clarify the timeline of your various duties, and that you also was in a CAD unit. So after 17 April 1975, what was your first job that you were assigned to do? Answer. Initially, I worked in the rice fields in Unit 2 to the northern part. Question, how long did you work there? Answer, I worked in the rice fields in the northern part from 1975 until I was evacuated or transferred to Unit 1 to the southern part, and that happened in 1976. Question, can you recall which month in 1976? Answer, I cannot recall the months. It has been more than 30 years now. I can only recall that I was transferred there to write the card. And at that time I was not yet instructed to teach. Question, So you were transferred into Unit 1 to be part of the subunit that is the CAT unit. And how long did you work there in the CAT unit? Answer. I worked in the CAT unit to transport rocks for a bridge building. I worked there for 8 months, so it was almost a year. And that spent almost entire 1976. And later on, I was transferred to look after the children to 10 cows. Question: yes, you did state that this morning that you looked after the children and you also tended the cows. In addition, you stated that there were about 100 children and 100 cows. Can you tell the court that within your cow tending group, how many workers were in it? Answer. Initially, I was alone by myself, but by 1978, there was a young teacher who came to assist me. So initially, I was alone looking after these 100 children. Question: when you were by yourself looking after 100 children and 100 cows, what was actually your function? Answer. My function was to teach children, and after the teaching session, then the children were sent to tend the cows, and I remained studying at the school. And by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they would bring the cows back, and then they would have meal. Question: I asked you about your function or your status while you were taking care of the children. Were you referred to as a team leader, a group leader, or a unit chief while you were looking after 100 children and 100 cows? Answer. I was designated as a teacher while at the same time looking after the children. Question: can you tell the court that in your capacity as this teacher, or in Khmer you say Kru Pramol Padom, what does it mean? Answer: that designated teacher or Kru Pramol Padom was for specific parts of the cooperative, for example, for the village or for the kitchen, but not for the mobile units, because in the mobile units, the children there were older. For example, 15, 16 years old children were in the mobile units. Question: in your document, that is E3/5515, in question answer 15, you spoke about the children unit, that there were male children and female children and concentration children. My question to you is, in regard to the concentration unit, children unit, was it a sub-unit of the children unit, or was it a standalone unit? Answer: there were no there was no female unit, because for the female children, they were looked after by a woman. I looked after the male children. Counsel, here I refer to your statement, question answer 15, as you refer to the children unit, which comprise of male and female children. And in addition, you stated that there was also a concentration children unit. Can you respond to that? Answer. That's what I stated through the co-investigating judge. I looked after the male children, or I refer to as a concentration children unit. Concentration children unit referred to younger children, because for older children, they were looked after and taught by other people. And they were actually at Thmai Pagoda, that is those elder children. And in fact, those elder children, they were part of a mobile unit. But the children that I looked after, they were quite young. Question, in order to clarify this issue for all, can you tell the court whether there was any female child in your children unit? Answer, no, there was no female child. There were only male children. As for the female children, they were placed to the eastern part of where I worked. Question. So, can we say that children unit in fact was divided into two? That is, those whose age range from 8 to 12, and then they were further divided into male children unit and female children unit, and you supervise the male children unit while another person supervised the female children unit. Am I correct in stating so? Answer, yes, that is correct. Question. Since this morning, upon listening to your testimony on the issue of teaching the children, you stated that you taught them how to write and how to spell and how to do numeracy, and no other subject matters were taught. Did you yourself received any training from the upper institution on teaching, on the teaching subject matter? Answer, no, I did not receive any teacher training. I was simply assigned to teach the children because they said that I was illiterate, so that I should teach those children. Question. What about at the cooperative or at the commune level? Did they give you instruction on what subject matters to teach? Answer, yes. I was instructed to teach children for 3 hours per day, from 11 to 12, and then a lunch break, and then we continued until 1:30. Then they were let go to tend the cows. Question, the 3-hour teaching program that you stated, was it a daily routine? Answer, I engage in teaching the children 2.5 hours to 3 hours every day, because Sometimes the unit chief would walk by and see, and if I did not teach the children, then I was blamed. Question: how frequent was the unit chief coming to see how you taught those children? Answer: sometimes he came, for example, today, and not the next day, but the day after. Question: did any other people coming to visit you or to inspect the place where you teach, where you taught? Answer: no, nobody else. I was alone teaching the children, and when the session was over, the children just ran down to tend the cows. And then I was by myself in the school. Question: while you were teaching or looking after the children, did any of the parents of the children coming to visit their children? Or did any of them come to request to bring their children along? Answer: while I was teaching the children, no parent ever came because they were engaged in working. And in the evening, that if any of the children wanted to go to see their parents, they would come to ask me, then I would let him or her go. Question: while you were teaching, did you make any assessment on the children's progress? For example, was there a test or examination in order to assess the knowledge absorbed by those children that you taught? Answer: no, I rarely did that. And in fact, some of those children are still living today, and yes, they actually knew how to read. Question: from the time that you worked as a teacher until the time the regime fell, what was your observation on the progress of those children? Answer: on this matter, most of them knew about the alphabets, but they were not really familiar or were not well versed in numeracy. I taught them, for example, just the numbers, for example, 1 to 100, but on multiplication or division, they did not know well. Question: now I'd like to discuss with you on the issue of labor. You stated that the children had to engage in labor, namely tending the cows after they concluded their study lesson with you. How did you devise the work for those children? Answer: I divided the work for those children in tending the cow in the following way. One child needed to tend one cow, and then that child needed to bring the cow back in late afternoon. And as for the cow dung collection, they needed to each get a basket full of cow dung. President interrupts. The time is appropriate for a short break, and we will take a break now and return at 3 o'clock. Court officer, please assist the witness during the break and have him return to the court again at 3 o'clock this afternoon. The court is now in recess.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ